welcome back, everyone. Just as a reminder, you're in Global Speed Networking, and we have a really great group of panelists for you to be able to learn from and hear from, and all about their advice and experience. So I am just going to get us started, and we're going to do some introductions. So first, I would ask that you share your name, title, and organization, and then share what makes you global. So we're going to get it started with Barbara Dickerson.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Barbara Dickerson, and I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. I worked for one of the 4 foreign affairs agencies. Everybody's familiar with State Department. I worked with the U.S. Agency for International Development, which manages a big chunk of U.S. foreign assistance overseas, and we worked only in developing countries. I did that career from 2001. I retired in 2018 and retired back to Washington just for a few months and then ended up relocating to Cincinnati. My husband's from here, and I'm also kind of a longstanding Ohioan. I went to Ohio State and lived in Columbus for 10 years. What makes me international, aside from my overseas career, I worked in several African countries. I spent my entire development career working in African countries, but for me, being international started when I was probably about 10 years old and discovering my aunt's high school Spanish textbook at home. I started teaching myself Spanish and imagining what it would be like to go live in a foreign country somewhere. It ended up, Spanish was not the language that became the vehicle. It ended up being French, but that started a lifelong love with learning languages and exploring other cultures. I took 4 years of Spanish in high school, started learning French in high school as well. I did 2 years. And then when I was at Ohio State, I went from a pre-med program, just one day deciding I wanted to do something that I really liked a lot, which was languages. So I did a dual major in French and German and minored in economics. Later on in 1990, I went to graduate school at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, did a master's degree in European Studies and International Economics. And then I met and married a former Peace Corps volunteer who had been in Togo, who also got involved in international development work. He's worked in public health for years. We moved to Togo together in 1990, and that kicked off my international career. We had 10 years where I followed him in his career. He was managing various contracts with USAID, the agency I ended up working with. And we went from Togo to Kenya together. I joined Foreign Service, did Benin, Madagascar, Nigeria, Liberia, and then my last assignment was Guinea, Sierra Leone. I think that just about wraps it up in terms of my background. I worked as a program officer when I was with USAID. That's all program reporting, planning, compliance, et cetera. And my last 2 assignments were in senior management. I was deputy mission director in Liberia and mission director in Guinea, also responsible for Sierra Leone up until the time I retired. So that's me.
Thank you, Barbara. Really appreciate you being here today. And I will pass it to Oxana.
Hello, everybody. My name is Oxana Prokhorova, and I work as a Director of Global Engagement for College of Engineering and Applied Science at the University of Cincinnati. I work at UC for 7 years, and prior to that, I spent 25 years in international business and traveling the world and doing business in different countries. What make me international and what led me to my career was the fact that I was born in a very global-minded family in Russia, in Moscow, in Soviet Union, which was not a very globally open country, but my grandparents and parents both worked in international business, international trade. So as a child, I've been exposed to a lot of cultures and countries, and I've been pretty lucky, sometimes through the items that my parents brought from overseas and their curiosity to other countries and cultures. And actually growing up in the Soviet Union was, we were always very open-minded about the different nationalities and cultures that country was combined of. So there was always respect and appreciation of the richness of that. So we had the right attitude. And when I was a child, 9 years old, I spent a year in Sri Lanka in Ceylon, and that reinforced my desire to travel globally and be overseas and live overseas. So I studied German in school. And I became a student of Moscow State University, College of Asian African Studies. And I picked Chinese, and I was given Japanese and English as a second and third language. I went to study abroad for a year in China in 1989, so it's been a pretty long time ago. So I studied there for a year. Then I worked in China for 5 years in 90s. Then I studied abroad again in United States, actually in Cincinnati. Went to Xavier and I received an MBA in international business. And I worked for a number of American companies, worked again in China and worked here in the United States. And I had my own business, consulting business, where I would help companies to export or set up their operations overseas in different countries from Russia, China, Ukraine, and other places. And then 7 years ago, I joined the University of Cincinnati because I wanted to share my knowledge and my experience and help create opportunities for students, for people like you, to go overseas, to have international experience, and to learn something new and to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Oxana. And I will pass it now to Michele Mansfield.
All right. Can you hear me? There we go. So my name's Michele Mansfield. I am a retired Associate Director of Global Research and Development at Procter & Gamble. My interest in countries outside of the US started probably as I was growing up. My dad had a job where he traveled a lot internationally for business. Sometimes he would bring the family with him. Sometimes he would bring his colleagues from other countries like Japan and Germany back into our home for dinner and conversation. So I got to know people of different cultures that way. I grew up in a very small town in Maine, and so there wasn't a lot of opportunity right close at hand to do that kind of thing. Then in high school, I studied French, and I had an opportunity to, with my class, live with a French family for a couple of weeks on an exchange, and they spoke no English. And so it was my first experience of needing to really immerse and learn the language. I had my first French dream and that was sort of eye-opening and life-changing for me. I continued on to get a degree in engineering, but I also continued with my French. So I took another 2 years of French in college, then went on to graduate school and ended up here in Cincinnati working for Procter & Gamble, which is, as most people know, a global company. My very first business trip with P&G was to Germany. So I got to know my colleagues in Germany quite well, and got to experience the different culture there as opposed to Cincinnati. And then on a trip the following year, I went to France and I was working in a plant making materials where nobody spoke English. And so I had another opportunity to use my French as I worked with that team with a company that was supplier that we were working with. And just through my entire career, I had many opportunities like that. My last role, I managed the site operations for R&D at 17 international locations. And so in that role, I think at one time I worked with people of over 20 different nationalities who were in my organization. And just traveling to those locations, getting to know the people there was incredibly rewarding And one theme that I've have found through all of my international work is that while some of our externalities, some of the ways we do things might be different, we are really more alike than we are different. And I tried to keep that in mind as I was working with my global colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. And we're going to go ahead and go to Christian Caudill.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian. I'm the Senior Communications Associate at Global Ties US. It's a nonprofit organization that the World Affairs Council is part of, and we help all of the community-based members across the country implement the International Visitor Leadership Program for the State Department, which is an international exchange program. And my career or interest in international affairs started in middle school. I attended an international baccalaureate middle school, and part of that curriculum, culture and different perspectives were woven into all of the classes. But we also had to take in sixth grade, rotate through Spanish, German, and French to decide what foreign language we wanted to speak or take classes in. I chose French and really, really enjoyed learning the language, but also learning the culture through the different activities we do in class. And so in high school, I did a 3-week homestay with a family outside of Lyon, and absolutely loved it. I was really nervous about going abroad and being away from my family for that long, but once I did that, I decided, I would absolutely study abroad in college, which I did. I did language school in France for 2 summers. And so kind of parallel to that, I was also very interested in politics and knew I wanted to do political science. So I took classes both in American politics and then also in European governance. So I ended up majoring in political science and European Union studies. So after that, I wasn't still totally sure what I wanted to do with my career. So I found an opportunity to go teach English in France for a year after undergrad. So I did that. I taught middle and high school students English language and also about American culture. Most of their English teachers had been British English. So it was definitely a very interesting to both, since the vocabulary is so different between British English and American English, to teach them American English and American culture. And then I was also an au pair. So I lived with a family with 3 little girls who only spoke French. So I also got very fluent in French. And so that was a big growth point for me. I really wanted to be able to use French to keep it up in my future careers, which I haven't quite gotten to do yet, but I'm still early in my career. So that's still the ultimate goal. So when I got back from France, I worked in meetings and events at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York for about 2 years because I knew I wanted to go to grad school. So I moved to DC for grad school and I got my master's in public diplomacy and worked at the State Department for about 9 months as a contractor in the private sector exchange programs, and then came to Global Ties to do communications work for them. So I've had several different roles already in my what feels like short career to me, and I still don't know where it's going to go next. So I would just say to everyone who's attending today, don't be afraid to move around in your career to really find what fits you. Especially now, it's pretty normal to have a bunch of different 2-year stints before you really figure out where you want to land. So it's definitely been a journey and one I'm still on, but it's exciting, and it's you get to learn a lot about yourself by doing all of these different positions as well.
Thank you, Christian. And last, but of course not least, Mike Hawkins.
Thank you, Michele. So unlike a lot of the other speakers who've had actual careers and a focus, jobs in global studies, global, interaction, I've had a different path. I'd say mine has been more involvement as a volunteer in global issues. So for those of you listening, you don't have to actually have a job that is purely global focused, but you can have another position and get involved on a volunteer basis. I happen to be on the board of the World Affairs Council, so really glad everybody's participating in this and have participated in the past in some of the networking. My real introduction, I guess globally, you would say I was born in Detroit. My mother's side of the family was all Lithuanian. Her parents, grandparents had all come from Lithuania. And they all spoke Lithuanian. And once a month, this was still when it was under communist control, they sent care packages once a month to family members in Lithuania. And in addition, my dad had served 6 years in World War II in the Navy, had been in the Far East, the Mediterranean, Pacific, North Atlantic. And so he brought a lot of that, both, food issues, but also information just about all those different places he had served in the military. So had that sort of exposure. Then I moved to Bowling Green, Kentucky, went to undergrad law school at the University of Kentucky, and then came to Cincinnati. So my path has really been through volunteer service. And in that capacity, I ended up starting out just as a local volunteer with the Red Cross. That ultimately led to, over a number of years, to being on the National American Red Cross board. And I was vice chair of international services and did a lot of mission trips and certainly engaged with USAID, Barbara, through Red Cross. And then that led to, after 6 years there, being on the board of Refugees International, where I was active as a board member for 13 years and am still involved as a board emeritus member. And with that, traveled around the globe a lot on various mission trips to refugee camps. And then from that, I've just gotten involved in other programs in the community, like Kharkiv Sister City program, traveled to the Ukraine. Through professional aspects, I've been involved as a leader in a couple of global legal networks. And just throughout all of that, have actually traveled, had the opportunity to travel to now 51 different countries. So just have brought a great deal of exposure. And the other dynamic, and a couple other speakers have mentioned this whole concept that's really developed in the last number of years, cross-cultural competency. A lot of it grows out of more diversity and inclusion. And there's a lot of chambers of commerce that are having programs of that nature. Again, trying to create aspects of welcomeness, inclusiveness, and it's really a great opportunity to build. Another area have gotten involved with, and this stemmed out of, I guess you'd say, a lot of the diversity and inclusion, cultural competency, but in Greater Cincinnati, there's an organization called Equation, used to be National Conference of Christians and Jews. And the last 3 years now, we've put on a festival of faiths where we brought 12 world religions together and have hosted events at Cintas Center. And then this year we did it virtually. But what that's done is bring various religions, many of which are attached to or connected more with countries, Hindu faith with India, Buddhist faith with various South Asian countries, Muslim faith with Pakistan, Afghanistan, other countries in that regard. So that's another area to think about getting involved with around world religions, because world religions bring global connections together as well. So I just say, there are other opportunities, whether it's with Rotary, with Chambers of Commerce, world religions, sister city exchange programs. So you can have a career path that isn't necessarily I have a job at USAID or a foreign policy job, but you can be a lawyer, you can be an accountant. And I know other people who have really devoted a lot of time and interest and energy in this area of global affairs who don't have specific jobs, but have volunteer careers in that area.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you all again for being here. So we're going to go ahead and go into a next question. So what do you see as the greatest challenge facing your industry at this time? And I'm actually going to start with Barbara. As a Foreign Service officer, you know, there's a lot going on within the State Department. So I don't know if you can shed any light on that.
So yes, I am following what's been happening in the State Department right now. A lot of concern about with a number of people retiring and leaving. What is the State Department and everything that's been happening in terms of our foreign policy over the last 4 years. What we're looking towards a future right now, and what are we going to have to do to rebuild some of that capacity. I can speak in a little bit more detail to what's been going on for years in the realm of foreign assistance programming. One of the biggest challenges is the fact that a lot of people don't really appreciate the importance of foreign assistance. There's always been strong support in Congress, but among the US population, it hasn't been terribly well understood. And even under this administration, there were moves initially to cut the foreign assistance budget. And then the question is, well, why should we be helping people in these countries when there are such huge needs here at home? And one of the things to think about is just the increasing complexity in the world, especially with regard to what's happening with the role of terrorism. I'm more familiar with what's happened on the African continent and conflict in general. This sparks off just enormous refugee outflows. And these are problems that can't necessarily be resolved by military means alone. There have to be development and diplomatic solutions to help keep us here in the United States and reduce the need for any kind of US military involvement. Also, working in development for me, it just makes the US economy stronger. 95% of the world's consumers live outside of our borders. And one thing I've said to colleagues over and over again in the past few years before I retired is Africa's a huge market right now. And it's, of course, not just Africa. We have commercial operations in South America and Asia as well. But this is important. It helps make the US economy much stronger. And we are going to need to stay competitive in the global marketplace. And then a subject that's very dear to my heart, when I got started working in international development, I had a very strong focus on public health myself. The US has done amazing work in making changes, substantive changes in improving maternal and child health. And we have been doing these programs that save lives, cure disease. We've had a strong focus on diseases like HIV, AIDS. USAID was very active in that in the 90s and still is through the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR. Also, we got heavily involved in trying to reduce mortality from malaria by half, starting under the Bush administration. And one thing that USAID has worked on since time immemorial is just programs that are designed to help cut extreme poverty. And we've made gains, although those gains, I would say, are under threat right now. We have so much, and this is the United States writ large, so much to be proud of in its leadership in helping those in need around the world.
Thank you, Barbara. And I'm also going to go ahead and pose that question to Mike, specifically in all of the volunteer world. What do you see as one of the biggest challenges facing nonprofits during this time and human rights?
Sure. I'd say the dynamic involving refugees and displaced persons around the world. When I first got on the board of Refugees International, I think the number was somewhere around 20-something million refugees, displaced persons. Today, it's almost 50 to 60 million. So just all the civil unrest, and many of the other issues that are taking place around the globe has caused this huge increase in displaced persons and refugees. And the greatest challenge is the focus. You know, and I think if people want to be a change agent, one of the things you see, and I'm sure Barbara from her experience will probably agree, but you know, the global powers spend so much money on damage control as opposed to proactive preventative programs. And so it's the challenge is having awareness and creating greater awareness about the needs to take and tackle some of these issues before they turn into great challenges. Because once they're great challenges, you know, going from 20 to 50 million refugees, you know, how do you manage that? How does UN High Commission on Refugees, how do other, you know, global powers, US, EU, others really help that situation? And thus the crisis, and I think Europe's dealing with it, and terrorism's a part of it. So that's a big challenge. And then the other component of it is having the awareness, and also people, you know, yourselves, all of us, committing resources to help agencies like Refugees International, Red Cross, and others to deal with a lot of the challenges that are out there.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm going to pose the same question to Oxana. I know that you have a lot of private business experience, you know, and I'm just curious, you know, specifically what you're seeing as some of the big challenges facing us at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Michele. Well, both in education and in business, we have similar challenges, and they are related to the slowdown, economic slowdown, and the tendency for reshoring businesses and education back to where we started, so back to their own countries, and protectionist policies. We see that, you know, in certain areas, certain industries, and certain countries. With education specifically, and specifically in raising awareness of importance of global competence, of global cultural competence, and giving students opportunity to study abroad. The biggest challenge that I see in my job right now is an ability to bring foreign students here to the United States because of difficulties receiving visa, because of the fear of their parents and them themselves traveling to the United States with perceived violence and instability. And, you know, I'm not even touching the coronavirus situation. And the costs associated with that, because the coronavirus, the pandemic, hit hard on the middle class all around the world, and people have less means to travel. So fear combined with lack of economic opportunities will affect global education. The positive side that I see is the rapid emergence of what we're doing right now, the communication and education via digital media, Zoom. And China is actually, it's interesting, emerging as a leader in education technology, EdTech. There are billions of dollars invested in startups there. And we're talking not just about Zoom meeting, we're talking about augmented reality. When a professor from Harvard can be teaching in China, and students will have a total you know, perception that the professor is right there with them in a room. So there are a lot of technologies that are and using artificial intelligence to see how each person learns individually and create a personalized algorithm of learning. You know, we see that now in language studies in some programs. You know, there is a startup linguist that was started by several physicists, and it analyzes how your brain learns, and we're all different, and it creates an algorithm to help you learn language better. So we see emergence of all these different new trends and the technologies. So that is hopeful. From the United States as well, we see a reduction of students who apply to study abroad because of the fears and perceived dangers of traveling overseas, or perceived negative attitude. So as educators, we need to work to overcome it. So that is my challenge, and challenge of many of my colleagues, to keep breaking these barriers down, and keep providing opportunities and scholarships, and even short opportunities or opportunities that are at home for study abroad. So for example, we're creating a program for students to work on a senior project when they're preparing to graduate. So last year they're working in a group, and we're creating right now groups with several partners in Taiwan, in China, and France, and Ghana, and Nigeria. So students can work on the same project involving groups in different countries. They're not going to visit each other and see each other, at least immediately, but they will work for a semester or for the whole year on something that requires a common solution. So we have a lot of things to do, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to resolve it as humans we always did. And I'm hoping that the new young blood will be coming from schools to help us with that.
Thank you, Oxana. And I'm going to pose the same question to Michele Mansfield. Given the consumer marketing industry, we're all wanting that Clorox. And so what are we looking at in the future? And you are on mute, so if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think there are a number of challenges facing the research and development group right now, mainly from figuring out what all the different restrictions are in the different countries. So if you're sitting in the US, but you have a global role, figuring out who is able to do what in which different research facility, I know has been a challenge. Although on the positive side, like Oxana had said, we had been developing global virtual interaction tools for years. And so it feels normal for us to be interacting with our colleagues in Asia or Europe or South America virtually on video calls and getting work done that way. I think the biggest issue with remote working right now is that you don't have those hallway or water fountain or over lunch conversations where you can bounce ideas off your colleagues. And that I think is where the real innovation and creativity can happen as you're interacting in those informal conversations. I think more broadly, there are impacts on global trade. So just things slowing down. We're so reliant as such a huge company on materials coming from all over the world. And so any disruption in that is a major disruption to our manufacturing. Everything from the steel that we need to build our machines, or perhaps some of the machine parts coming from either China or Germany, to the raw materials that we use to make our products. And any disruption globally or in a specific location globally can impact that. One example was when a number of years ago, when there was a nuclear incident at Fukushima, one of our major suppliers of the absorbent materials that go in diapers was in the border of impact for that from that incident. And so we needed to very quickly pivot, put in place testing protocols, understand really what was going on with help from the Japanese government, and enable our factories to keep making diapers. So any disruption like that, and certainly the coronavirus is a huge disruption globally, can really impact our ability to get the materials we need to make our products.
Thank you, Michele. I'm specifically going to ask Christian this, given you're one of our youngest panelists today, and you were recently, at university, any advice that you can give to a student in 2020, especially someone who wants to get into communications, which is really great at Global Ties.
Yeah, sure. So first, as I said earlier, don't be afraid to move around to find your right fit. And that can start when you're a student. One silver lining of the COVID pandemic is remote work, in terms of being able to, or places are open to remote internships. So that really, I think, opens your opportunities to get experience that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get if you actually had to move somewhere to do an internship. So take advantage of those opportunities that can really help you figure out what area, whether nonprofit or private sector or even government as well, has virtual internships. So both in the industry and then also really where you want to focus in. So I did some internships in events, did some in communications, and the great thing about Global Ties being a small nonprofit organization is that I get to do events and communications here. So that, you know, I found a niche of what I really enjoyed doing. So yeah, take advantage of the virtual opportunities you have now. And once things move offline, I guess one day that will happen. You know, take advantage of the opportunity to be able to physically move around. If you have an opportunity to go abroad, whether it's just to travel, if you want to learn a different language, look into language schools for cultural exchange opportunities, or if you have a chance to work, there are tons of organizations and programs, private, and the one I went on was funded by the French government, actually. So government funded for you to teach English abroad and have other short-term careers abroad as well.
Thank you. And we're going to move on to our final question and really do a lightning round. So if you can think about this, you have 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds. So our final question for each panelist: what does peace and justice mean to you? Which is, again, our theme for the week. And I'm actually going to go backwards. So Christian, if you don't mind answering that first.
Sure. So to me, it means respecting each other, inclusion, listening to each other, you know, being open to listening to people who have in the past not been listened to, and definitely setting aside your own sort of pride and privilege to listen to those who have been victims of, you know, injustice and violence, or just not peace, and letting them take the reins and move us in a productive place.
Thank you. And Michele?
To me, personally, I think we're all interconnected globally, every single one of us. And so an injustice to one person is really an injustice to all of us. It impacts every single person on this planet. I think peace is not the absence of conflict, but an ability to sit down across a table with each other, understand the pain and the things that each person is going through, and trying to come to an equitable solution.
Oxana?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Okay.
Yeah, you're
It's
good.
equal opportunities and no discrimination in how we treat people, with respect, compassion, and treat them equally. Because peace comes from peace of mind and peace of action. And if you think about when you are upset or mad, is when you are treated, misunderstood, or treated unfairly. So the main point is to really come from communication and understanding yourself and others, and not treating people with, we all have biases and we'll never get rid of them, but understanding that, and understanding that people come with different opinion and different responses because of their life circumstances and because of what they know. So breaking our own barriers in that, learning more of real facts, and analyzing our own behavior, and giving the same benefit of doubt to other people. This is a good first step to justice and peace. We probably will never get there completely, but realization of that and working towards that, and treating people as individuals rather than part of the group, biased group, is the first step.
Thank you, Oxana. And lightning rounds for our last two. Mike, if you want to unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah, I'd say solution to peace and creation of peace and justice is through mutual respect for fellow human beings. And one way to go about that is, we all hear the golden rule: treat others the way you would like to be treated. And then some have even come up with the platinum rule: treat others the way they would like to be treated. So
Thank you, Mike. And Barbara?
Well, I had a pat answer that I developed to this question, but listening to the contributions from everyone else, especially about the need to create a sense of community, the empathy, the need to build those relationships. I'm just going to tell you a very short story about an experience that I had just before I left my last job with USAID. I was visiting a friend who lived in Dakar over a weekend, and she has a connection to Cameroon. She had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon. She's now deputy mission director in Senegal. But because of that connection to Cameroon, she had invited a group of students to her house for dinner one night. They were all from different parts of Cameroon, but they were participating in this Young African Leaders Initiative, which is run by the State Department. We see the Mandela Fellows here in the United States, but there is another part where they actually go for leadership training at one of the regional centers on the continent. And I don't know how much people are aware, but there can be a lot of preconceptions, prejudices for people who are citizens of one African country versus another. Nigerians sometimes have a particularly bad reputation. Sometimes South Africans can have a bad reputation. And when these folks were brought in for, this is a very, very intensive, several weeks leadership course, they're basically put into sharing a room with someone else, very close quarters. They have to work carefully with each other, closely with each other. And what struck me was listening to the way that had changed their preconceptions and learning how to respect people who were coming from somewhere else on the continent. If there was some way we could do this globally, writ larger, or even in the United States, community by community, this is what peace and justice means to me. It's just learning how to change your worldview and your mindset.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And talking about your perspectives and advice, even answering that last question. There's a lot to unfold in that for students this year and in their future. So again, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And students out there, whether you're in high school or college, I hope that you have learned a little bit, and we'll be able to inspire you to take on a career or a volunteer that is global, and that you can be multicultural in your future. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a really great weekend. So thanks, panelists, one more time.
Thank you. Learn the languages. Learn the languages. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Thank you all again. Bye.
Bye.